Okay, Chair, the YouTube stream has started. You may now start the meeting.
Thank you, Paul. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Councillor Doris Jones and I'm the Chair of the Planning Application Committee. Before we start the meeting, I'd like to make a few introductions. The council members are the people who will be making the decision and voting on the application. So I wonder if the council members could just put their hands up, please, so that any members of the public can identify you, please. Thank you very much. Then we have our planning officer, Mr. Coates, is head of planning, development and environment. Lisa Hutchinson, principal planning officer, council highways. Oh, we've got Mr. Howson. Are you council highways?
Mr. Howson today, councillor, yes.
Thank you very much. And then our planning committee clerk, who will keep us all right, is Mr. Paul Dalton. Paul, are you online? Thank you.
I am, councillor, here.
I'm the planning committee chair, and my role as the chair is to maintain order at the meeting and ensure that the meeting proceeds in accordance with the council's planning policy. In the event of any vote being tied on this matter, I will have the casting vote. But I must reiterate before we start the meeting at this point that any applicant or agent who is in attendance for any meeting is not permitted to do any presentation to the committee, but they may answer technical or factual questions if asked directly by any of the members. Thank you. Attendance, have we any apologies? David?
We do, councillor. Would you like me to take the attendance roll?
Please, yes, I think
Yep,
good idea.
no problem. As we have done at previous meetings, previous virtual meetings, councillors, I'm just going to read through the names of the committee members. If you can unmute your microphone when I read your name, confirm your attendance at the meeting today, and then remute your microphone again, please. Thank you. So if I can start with Councillor Allen, first of all.
Here.
Thank you, councillor. Councillor Clark.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Cousins.
Present, Paul.
Thank you, councillor. Councillor Heslop.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Cindy Hughes.
I'm here, Mr. Dalton. Thank you.
Thank you, councillor. Councillor Johnson.
Here.
Thank you. Councillor Mrs. Jones. Can see you, yeah. Councillor Keir.
Here.
Thank you, councillor. Councillor Lee.
Here.
Thank you, councillor. I have received apologies from Councillor Lister, Chair. Councillor Marshall.
I'm here, Paul. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor McCollum.
Here, Mr. Dalton.
Thank you, councillor. Councillor Tate.
Afternoon, Paul.
Afternoon, councillor. Councillor Tostivan.
Here, thank you.
And Councillor Wallace.
Good afternoon, Paul. Yes, I'm here.
Afternoon, councillor. Thank you very much. That's everybody, Chair. Thank you very much.
Any declarations of interest from members at all?
Yes, I have, Chair. With regard to the Mowden Staindrop Road, I'm the ward member for that premise. I have had discussions with the applicant about his application, and I've had some online discussions with some of the objectors as well. I guess I need to declare that.
Okay, noted. Councillor Cousins.
Yes, I have a non-pecuniary interest with the Faverdale application. I'm a member of the Co-op Party, but it doesn't affect any of my decisions.
Okay, that is noted, Councillor Cousins. To approve the minutes of the committee held on the 30th of September, can we move them, please? All accepted. Thank you. Introduction to proceedings now. Assistant Director of Law, Andrew Harrington, will go through the proceedings. Andrew.
Thanks very much, Chair. We begin each matter with the Planning Officer presenting their report to members. Once they're finished, if the ward councillor has expressed a wish to speak at the meeting, they will be invited to do so. Members can then ask questions of the applicant or agent if they're in attendance. The Planning Officer will then summarise key planning issues. Members can then ask questions of officers, and the Planning Officer will make any final comments. and then move on to members debating the matter and formulating motion or motions upon which to vote and making a decision. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. That now takes us to item number 5, which is the application and planning permissions. Can I first of all introduce Mr. Coates? David.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks very much. The first item on the agenda is on page 11. Members will recall last time around they were minded to approve this particular application at Vantage Point in Faverdale, and the instructions that were given to officers as members took a decision contrary to the recommendation of officers to come back to this meeting with a list of conditions, appropriate conditions to attach to any approval that members were minded to make. The report you have in front of you does that. It also sets out the reasoning following the discussion that members had, setting out the reasoning why they came to that particular conclusion. I will come back to that in a moment, if I may, because I'm sure members will be aware that there has been a number of approaches from the developers of the adjacent site, which Tesco's have an interest in. I understand that communications have been had by email, letter, and indeed a telephone call from an agent appointed on their behalf, which members have received in recent days. I don't wish to comment on that. I'm sure members will have their own view on that particular issue. But as I say, to what that communication involved also was a council opinion on whether it was appropriate at this moment in time for members to move forward with this particular decision in the light of the outstanding Tesco's application, which is adjacent. And you can just see that the site we're talking about, which is the Lidl application in red, and the Tesco's application, which is with us, it's been with us for about a fortnight now, is still going through the planning consideration process is just to the south. The barrister's opinion, which is associated with the communication directly with members, suggests that one decision, i.e. this one, that the Lidl site shouldn't be taken until both applications are actually running together, and a joint decision on both matters should perhaps be taken at the same committee. We've obviously taken our own legal advice on this matter to enable us to advise members on the appropriate way forward. And the advice is that there's nothing to stop members moving forward with this particular application. That's the Lidl application we're talking about. But there has to be some consideration about the two applications, particularly the outstanding Tesco's application, which can be seen as a material consideration within this process. The key issue here, I think, is if the two schemes were seen to be very similar or identical, there would be a very strong argument to suggest that both applications should be heard together. However, our advice also leads us down the route to say that those comparisons, when you look at the Lidl application and you look at the Tesco application, they are substantially different. And they're substantially different for a number of reasons. The Lidl application consists of a supermarket, A1 use, which is about 1,900 square metres. It also consists of a retail store, which is members will be familiar, is Home Bargains, and it also involves a drive-through unit, about 167 square metres. The Tesco development, or the Armscliffe development, where members have had the communications through, is a store which is much bigger. That is about 3,552 square metres. It also involves a commercial unit at 464 square metres, and 2 drive-through restaurants, McDonald's and a Costa Coffee, and of course a petrol filling station. The advice we've received and the advice I'm giving to members is that these schemes are quite dramatically different in their nature and scale, so that there's no direct comparison to be made between the 2 sites. So the advice we've received, it is possible for members to proceed to make a decision today based on the report, which I'll come to in a moment, and of course that they are at liberty to consider the Tesco scheme as being something quite separate and different at the appropriate time when that application is available to be presented to them. It's anticipated, depending on the information that we process and the analysis we need to do, it's hoped that application can be presented to members either just before or Christmas or sometime in January. So there is a fairly short lead-in. But the important thing to stress, I think, is that if it had been an application which was identical or similar between the 2 developers, I think it would have been a reasonable thing to do to consider them both together. But in this particular case, there are acknowledged differences between the 2 sites, so it is possible to move forward with a decision today. In addition to that opening statement, Chair, we have had some further representations before I move on to the substantive report, if I may. One of which is from the Co-op, who were one of the original objectors to the scheme. You'd be aware that the Co-op have a number of interests throughout. Councillor Wallace has his hand up, Chair. Do you wish to let him in?
Not at the moment. I think you've got to finish.
Okay. I'll continue on then, Councillor Johnson, beg your pardon. We've had a letter from the Co-op, who are an original objector to the scheme. Because of the system we're operating at the moment, with COVID regulations and operating remotely, we have a fairly clear protocol to who was actually in the meeting and who isn't. Unfortunately, in terms of operational requirements, it's quite difficult to get objectors into the meeting and to control that process virtually. So what we do is allow objectors to make representations. In this particular case, the Co-op has contacted the chair directly and asked for a particular statement to be read out on their behalf. It's not too lengthy, and in my opinion doesn't introduce any significant new issues that members haven't already heard, but nevertheless, in terms of balance and fairness, the chair felt it would be worthwhile to have this read out at this particular planning committee. So with your permission, Chair, if I may proceed to do that.
Please do. Yep.
Thank you. So this is a letter from a Mr. Chris Beebe, who is the Co-op's in-house town planning manager, and it was an email sent directly to the chair, which has been copied into me. It says the statement has been prepared by Chris Beebe, Co-op's in-house town planning manager, responsible for this region. The Co-op would like to make it clear that it does not object to planning applications lightly, nor does it object to planning applications based on commercial competition. It only objects where it considers that the proposed development will result in a significant adverse impact on a designated centre, which a co-op is located. We are very disappointed that we were not given the opportunity to speak at last committee, while the applicant was afforded the opportunity to speak at committee. This appears to be fundamentally unfair. I appreciate the points that this gentleman is making, but this is totally in line with our current protocol. Hence, to try and balance this back up, that's why I'm reading this statement to you today. It is, of course, the committee's right to disagree with Planning Officer's report and approve this application, but before doing so, I would strongly urge you to consider the impact of the existing local centres. As the report confirms, the co-op operates 2 stores in the Cockatton District Centre, one at Woodland Road and the other at West Auckland Road. The applicants suggest that the proposal will result in a combined impact of 8% on the Cockatton District Centre. Even at this level, Nexus Planning, who were our planning advisors, Chair, when we consider this application, our retail planning advisors, have advised that there is a real concern whether the 1 or 2 co-op stores will continue to trade. The co-op has projected the impact on this centre to be more than 20% in their opinion, and can categorically confirm that the continued viability of these stores will be closely looked at based on their current and likely future trading performance. The loss of these stores themselves will result in a significant adverse impact on the district centre, and this does not even include the loss of linked trips to other nearby retailers. The Council's independent retail advice recommended that the application be refused, and while it is easy to think that new proposals only represent a gain, in the reality is that allowing the application will have very real impacts on existing shops and people working within them. This is not my view, but the view of the independent experts hired by the Council. Sustainable planning reasons exist to refuse the application. Before you approve this application, I would ask simply that you consider the impact that the proposal will have upon stores and staff who have been working tirelessly throughout the pandemic to ensure shops stay open. Thank you for your time. That's Chris Beebe, who was the co-op's in-house planning manager. So that is a letter that the chair agreed to for me to read out to balance up the area where he couldn't actually make a contribution last time. Again, in the spirit of balance, I also have a letter from a Scott Royal, who works for Royal Pilgrim Communications, representing the Hanstein site, which is the site we're actually talking about today. That's the Lidl site. Because they had an opportunity, or their representatives had an opportunity to speak last time around, I won't go through in full detail through this letter, but if I may, Chair, I'll just highlight the main bits, if I may, in the spirit of balance. This is from a Scott Royal, who is from Royal Pilgrim Communications, who says, the planning application was the subject of careful, detailed consideration by members of the Planning Applications Committee at the previous meeting on the 13th of September. Since the previous committee, Hanstein's representatives have worked with officers, meaning planning officers at the council, to agree the schedule of planning conditions, which I'll come on to in the report that's before us. And we can confirm that the applicants and the operators, Lidl, Home Bargains and Starbucks, are happy to accept the planning conditions before your consideration. By way of reminder, they note there are a wide range of benefits for this particular scheme. That is clearing up and regenerate a brownfield site, the creation of jobs, provide local shopping choice within a sustainable location, and indeed it attracted wide-scale public support. As a final note, he has also indicated that Little Home Bargains Starbucks are signed up to this scheme, and the funds are in place to deliver the development. Following in your approval of the planning conditions, the developers will immediately start the process of satisfying the preconditions, which they must do, and construction work will begin within weeks. And that's the view of the representatives of Hanstein. Just to finish off, Chair, in terms of representations received, before I move on to the substantive report, we've also received an email from an occupier of Dalesford Grove, which is fairly near the development. I'm writing to support in support of these plans. The area does need these facilities, talking of the Lidl proposal, and are far more suitable than the Tesco's plans recently mooted. Apologies for taking a little bit of committee time up there, Chair, but I think it's important in the terms of balance to set those issues out, particularly the issues around submissions made directly to members by representatives of Tesco's. Moving on to the substantive report, Chair. Members will be aware that...
Chair, I had my hand up to talk to a question, Councillor David Coates.
Yes, I appreciate that, Councillor Johnson, but I thought perhaps we should let Dave finish his presentation and then it's turn for questions. So can we just let the presentation finish first, if you don't mind?
It's really a question of relevance, not to do with the application.
Okay.
David Coates has brought on items of relevance to do with Cockerton from the co-op. There is in the one of the statements from BECG a very disturbing comment that Tesco have made it very clear that if the progression of the alternative Lidl proposal, it would mean they would not commit to investing in Darlington. Now, how relevant is that to this decision?
Perhaps if I can answer that, Chair. That is, at this stage, Councillor, mere supposition. I don't think that is particularly a material consideration to move forward to make a decision on this Lidl application today. The views of somebody, whether they'll commit or they won't commit to something else, it doesn't go to the heart of what we're seeking to do today. And members, whether they're seeking to commit or not to commit, it may well be that members may take a different view on a separate application. We haven't really considered that yet, and whether somebody will commit to the scheme, they need planning permission to do that first. And we haven't got to the point where we've arrived at a formal recommendation on the Tesco's scheme. So I don't think that in itself is a reason to prevent members moving forward with the decision today.
Thank you.
Are you finished now, Councillor Johnson?
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Anybody else? No. I understand the...
Councillor Tate.
Oh, beg your pardon, Councillor Tate. Yes.
Hi there, thank you, Chair. It's very similar to what Councillor Johnson's just asked. I understand Dave's response in regards to that, but what does the solicitor think? If we can ask Andrew the same question.
Andrew?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I don't disagree with Mr. Coates.
Thanks very much.
Okay.
Right, at this stage, I normally invite the ward councillor
Have I got a ward councillor? No?
Chair, I haven't finished the report yet.
Yeah, all right. Can
Mr. Coates finish his report, please? Sorry.
Thanks, Chair. As I say, I do apologise for going through a quite lengthy preamble, but I think it was quite important to, in terms of balance, to make sure all those views were on the table and in front of members, and hopefully that's fairly clear now. So to come back to the substantive report, members will recall that on the 30th September they were minded to grant planning permission for the Lidl scheme, subject to officers coming back with an appropriate list of conditions and reasons for granting permission, which was contrary to officer recommendation. There's also a reference in the report made to the Section 106 agreement, which we're at the latter stages of negotiating with the Lidl agencies, which is ready to be signed. The general application and background is set out on page 12. With your permission, Chair, I won't go through all of those details again because members have heard that at some length last time around. But moving on to page 13, I acknowledge that members did debate this particular application at some length, and it was quite clear from those discussions and comments made, members took into account the findings and conclusions and the recommendations set out in the officer's report, and indeed any comments that were presented to the meeting. So I'm satisfied in terms of due process, whilst members didn't go with officer's recommendation, due consideration was given to that planning process. The issues that members considered was the potential impact of the proposed development on the town centre, and more importantly the appropriate district centres in this particular case, including West Park, Cockerton District Centre. Members also acknowledged that there was potential harm from this proposal upon this district centres, and that carried weight in their decision-making process. In this instance, however, members considered that there were other material planning considerations to be taken into account, which it's perfectly their liberty to do, and that they included that there was sufficient land allocated in the borough for employment purposes. You appreciate the Lidl site is an extant allocation for employment purposes. It would result in the use of a brownfield site, which is a beneficial thing to consider, and the likelihood of the land being used for other purposes due to the costs associated with remediating the site was quite remote. They also considered the issue of job creation, which was part and parcel of the submissions of the applicant. They also considered the level of support from nearby residents as part of that balance, that package. So on balance, members took the view that those particular material considerations that I've just outlined outweighed any potential impact that the development may have on the viability and vitality of the Cockerton District Centre. So in a nutshell, those are the things, picking up from the debate that we had last time around and the direction of travel of that debate, those are the material considerations that we as officers, or I as an officer, picked up on, that members took into account to move away from the officer recommendation. There's also a reference in the report to the 106 agreement that we're in the latter stages of negotiating. I understand that's ready for signature, and that resulted in a public transport contribution of £15,440, and a sustainable transport contribution, including improvements to the Black Path, and that obligation would equate to £52,600. That's the background, Chair. To move on fairly briefly to the list, the fairly extensive list of conditions, which goes over a number of pages, which we're offering members to consider, with a view to moving forward to the granting of planning permission. You will of course appreciate, whilst we're in a minded to approve position at the moment, as of last committee, these conditions are to be attached to that minded to approve. It would still, if members were minded to agree all of these conditions, it would still remain a minded to approve position, because there is a 106 agreement to be signed, and it would be subject to that 106 agreement outlining those two financial issues to be signed, which I understand is imminent. So the list of conditions is lengthy. There aren't anything out of the ordinary in particular in there, and I'm happy to answer any questions on the purpose or justification for any of those conditions. There are a few I'd bring members' attention to, Chair, if I may. Condition number 3. It's on page 16. It's the units identified as Lidl and Home Bargains shall be used for Class A1 retail and for no other purpose within the same use class. So that's focusing on tying in that particular A1 retail use within the generic use class, rather than it wandering into other areas of retail. So it is specifically for these purposes. The Starbucks on condition 4 is a very similar condition, and the unit, condition number 5 on the Lidl master plan again talks about the type of retail sales which are permissible for there. The condition 6, again, all of these conditions relate to conditions applied in other areas just across the road on the Aldi and the Marks and Spencer's supermarket. And of course, there's condition 8, there's no internal subdivision of any unit actually allowed without previous permission. I would also refer you to page 18, Chair, is condition 12. Again, it talks about hours of operation. That's a fairly standard condition, and that's from 8 in the morning till 10 at night, Monday to Saturday, and 10 till 1600 hours on a Sunday. Again, the home bargains on condition number 13, that relates to identical hours on the home bargains issue. Condition 14 relates to deliveries, and condition 15 relates to waste collection at the various units. The rest of the conditions, Chair, are relatively straightforward and what we'd normally expect to see should members proceed to grant planning permission on this particular issue. To conclude, Chair, what I've tried to do today is set out, bearing in mind that members were minded to approve this last time around, subject to the appropriate conditions, and the reasons for granting planning permission were put before members today, and hopefully that is fairly clear with what I've been speaking about in recent minutes. I've also tried to bring members' attention to the information submitted directly to them from the Tesco development, and come to a conclusion on that based on our legal advice, which essentially questions whether members are able to move forward to make a decision on this application, or are they required to wait and consider both of the two applications, the Tesco applications and the Lidl one together? And our clear advice on that particular issue is that because of the nature of the two schemes, which are quite different, and on that list I went through, I highlighted those quite significant differences. You're not comparing apples with apples, the two separate issues, and it's perfectly feasible to go forward to grant permission if that's what member on this particular application today. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. No, I can't bring in the ward councillor, he's not here, but I will invite members to ask questions of the applicant or the agent if he's in attendance, but I don't think they are they? No. And can I just stress that when you do ask questions, please keep them to technical and factual, because the agent cannot make any speeches. Have we got the agent here with us? He is here, right, thank you. But before I move on and bring members in, I've got to say personally, the phone call I received, which I shut off very quickly from the representatives of these people, was not, in my mind, very professional thing to do to a planning committee members. We're here to make our own minds and totally independent of anything else. And I believe that we did that at our last planning committee meeting, and I believe we will carry on doing that. And to balance the views, if you like, of all sides, Mr. Coates, the planning officer, has quite happily read whatever was wanted to be said by the co-op. So I think we've been fair with everybody, and I think the decisions we made were the right ones. I'm going to bring in Councillor Wallace. Do you want to ask any questions of the agent, please? Factual or technical?
Not of the agent, it's more an observation to Mr. Coates, Chair.
Right, well, I'll keep that till later then. Councillor Allen, did you want to speak to the agent at all?
Yes, please, Chair. In your application, I don't notice anything about provision of toilets in any of the two buildings. My thing is, currently, apart from just ladies and gents, we're now in an area whereby we should be having non-gender toilet facilities. We should also be having facilities to enable fathers, single fathers, to take their daughters to the toilet and vice versa. So in other words, we, instead of just sticking to the old-fashioned men's, ladies and a disabled toilet, we need to be thinking bigger, and a new development would perhaps be the place to start on that, if that's appropriate herewith. Thank you.
And the agent answer the question for Councillor Allen, please.
Thanks,
only answer the question direct, please.
Yes, Madam Chair. There are toilet facilities in all of the units that have been brought forward. They have their own independent models, because obviously there's 3 independent retailers that are coming forward, but there are toilet facilities that allow people to obviously use convenience. So,
thank you very much. Councillor Lee, did you want to ask a technical question of the agents, please?
It's not so much a technical question, it's just but it is a question, not necessarily technical. As members are fully aware, I'm into trees, and one of the things that I do notice an awful lot when you travel to the south of England, the number of estates or commercial estates you go into have lots and lots of trees planted, and I think it would be a lovely gesture to be able to plant trees along the front of Faverdale Road, so that you are actually going through an avenue. It'll not only do a bit of good for our climate change, it'll make the whole estate much more pleasant, as opposed to just simply seeing bricks and concrete. So would you be willing to do that, include that? Because there's nothing in the conditions that I could see to do with landscaping. Thank you, Chair.
Applicant.
The application is obviously submitted as it is, we'll take that on board, but obviously members have got the application as it stands, and that's what's to be determined in front of you. We'll obviously take on board those comments, and if it can be done, then we'll look at it. But the application as it is stands with yourselves.
Thank you.
Could I just come in there? But we are now looking at conditions, sir. This is what we're agreeing with now. So all I'm really doing is adding an additional condition to that. So that.
As I say, that we've gone through in detail with the plan officers in terms of conditions that have been proposed, and if members feel that that is something they wish to put forward, then clearly that will be part of your decision process. As I say, we're not against any landscaping or trees, but again, you have the scheme that's in front of you at the present time. If you feel that it's necessary to put that condition, then by all means, that's your prerogative.
Thank you, Gerald. Thank you, Mr. Hudson.
Doris, you've gone back on mute again. Sorry.
Sorry about that.
I didn't hear you.
I will bring the planning officer, Mr. Coates, in now to just summarise on the key issues, and then members make a question. Mr. Coates.
Thanks very much, Chair. It was just in direct response, really, to Councillor Lee's question. The agent is absolutely right. The application is before us, is what we see is what we get. These conditions, in my view, cover the direction of travel in terms of granting planning permission should members wish to do so. It is, of course, open to members as decision makers. If the tree issue was deemed to be particularly important or as a fundamental to the decision-making process, is to ensure that an appropriate condition was attached to say that an improved or better landscaping scheme or a specific landscaping scheme should be attached to this particular permission. That's that they're at liberty to do that.
Thank you, Mr. Coates. Are there any questions to Mr. Coates? Councillor Hughes, I can see your hand up. Councillor Hughes.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I have a question, in fact, a couple of questions. One is in relation to the impact assessment. And I recognize that at the last meeting, we had a report concerning the sequential test, but there is guidance in relation to the effect of proposals for retail centres, not only on their nearby shopping areas, but in other areas as well. So the other Aldi and Lidl part of town would conceivably have been part of that. And I note that there's a requirement that the area should be over 2,500 square feet, I believe, or meters. I'm not sure which one. And I need some reassurance, because the fact that we're taking decisions about two different, well, I'm not sure if we've actually decided that yet, but two applications, I don't really believe that we should be circumventing guidance by taking two applications separately, if that would mean that an impact assessment wouldn't be required. I've looked at the footprint of this particular one, and my reading is that there should have been an impact assessment attached to this application anyway. So I'm seeking guidance on that from Mr. Coates. And also, in line with my friend Councillor Lee, I don't see any condition in here that relates to national policy, planning policy framework, paragraph 35, that says that any developments like this should incorporate facilities for charging plug-in and other ultra-low emissions vehicles. And I wonder if that actually forms part of the conditioning for this particular application. I didn't see it, but that's a separate issue. I think the bigger issue is in relation to the impact assessment, because although Mr. Coates did make a very clear presentation in relation to the issues that members took into account at the last meeting, I still believe that because of the concerns that were clearly raised by residents and others in the pre-application process, that an impact assessment should have actually been included. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Wallace. Councillor Wallace, your mic's not on, so I will just before
would it be possible? Forgive me. Would it be possible to hear Mr. Coates' response?
Yes.
Before I ask my
just
question?
about to do that. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Chair. Just to answer your questions, Councillor Hughes, in the first instance, there was an impact assessment submitted with the application for the Lidl application, and that concluded that there was no impact or limited impact on Cockerton Town Centre. The Apex retail planning report that we engaged didn't agree with that. It didn't go so far as to say that there was impact. What it said was, based on the information, that impact was not proven or disapproved. But that in itself, in the words or in the views of our retail planning consultant, was sufficient to justify refusal of planning application, of the Lidl planning application, and that came forward within our recommendation to members. So to answer your question, was a retail assessment or impact assessment done? Yes, it was. Our agents acting on our behalf came to the conclusion that there may well have been impact on Cockerton district centre. It certainly wasn't proven one way or the other. So the fallback position in those circumstances, it was justifiable to recommend to members that permission shouldn't be granted. Now, that's that particular element. The report that's come back to members, hopefully, is fairly clear synopsis of the discussion that took place, in that members accepted that issue. However, the other material considerations that we're actually talking about in terms of the second leg of section 38, all those issues that members talked about in terms of the use of contaminated land, the use of an employment-based allocation which was no longer needed, the need to stop the leaching of retail activity leaving the town to areas outside of the borough. On balance, the decision that was taken was to grant planning permission contrary to WAFT's recommendation, and I accept that. There's nothing wrong with that, but as long as it's properly justified, and the report that you've got before you today, I think sets out reasonably those justifications or reasons why members didn't agree with officers on that particular occasion. Your second point, Councillor Hughes, regarding vehicle charging is a valid one, and I know Councillor Lee would be particularly interested in this as well. It's something that, if members were minded to move forward with these sets of conditions, it's something that it could and should quite correctly be added, in my opinion. Thank you.
Chair, could I just clarify a point?
Do you want to finish off before I bring Councillor Wallace in?
Just to clarify, I think that the sufficiency.
Can you, on mic? Thank you.
Yep. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
It's really the sufficiency of this so-called impact assessment. Can you hear me?
I can't hear a thing, Mike.
I can hear you.
Can you hear me? Okay.
I can hear you, Councillor, yes.
Right. So it's the sufficiency of.
I think we've just got a few problems with the chair's mic.
Can you hear me now, Chair?
Can you all hear me now?
Yes.
I can't hear you.
I
can't hear them.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Right.
Yes. I'm sorry to belabor this point, but thank you. It's just in relation to the impact assessment itself, the so-called impact assessment.
Yeah.
And it's in relation to the fact that, and Councillor Johnson touched on it himself, in the sense that what should have been taken into account in the impact assessment is any existing, committed, or planned public or private investment. So it's looking at the impact of this development that we're looking at today, and the impact that would have on the knock-on effect, not only in Cockerton. Cockerton is clearly very, very important, but other places in the town. And from my recollection, that report that we heard about was silent on that. It talked about Cockerton, it talked about the town center, but not anything else. And really the guidance, my reading is that it's quite clear. So even if it mentioned it and then dismissed it, but my recollection was that it didn't. So that's my point, that I believe that impact work that was presented at the last committee meeting was insufficient.
Just very briefly, Chair, if I may come back.
Yeah.
I'm choosing words fairly carefully here, because I appreciate members last time around took a different view to officers, and I respect that. But the point I would make, Councillor Hughes, is that in our view, the recommendation we arrived at took that fully into account, and that's why we arrived at the recommendation that we did. Notwithstanding that, members took a different view, which is highlighting the other material considerations that it took into account, which is in the report that's before you. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wallace.
Thank you, Chair. I think we find ourselves in a bit of a pickle now, frankly. And I'd like to thank Mr. Coates for his very thoughtful and carefully considered, carefully worded introduction and comments in response to Councillor Johnson and Councillor Hughes. And I think we do have to proceed with great caution. I note from your comments, Mr. Coates, that when we've taken barristers, Silk's advice, barristers' advice, and he said or she said that the committee didn't legally have to defer the matter at this stage, but would it be correct that the committee could, if it so chose, defer the matter so that the conditions that would be attached to this application could be considered at the same time as the wider, Tesco application before Christmas was considered? Because, as Councillor Hughes has set out, very, very clearly, and you've set out the circumstances yourself regarding the advice, the clear advice the committee received from officers last time. We then turn to page 15 in paragraph 18, where you've tried to set out the reasons why members rejected the advice that they were given. And none of those, aside from, I think, probably item D, refer to the impact on Cockerton. So what you've said there is additional retail facilities at the application site would result in some qualitative improvement in the local food retail offer. Now, that was purely anecdotal, based on discussions that members were having last time. It wasn't based on any survey or assessment or anything, any of the steps that Councillor Hughes points out that we should have taken. And then when I turn to the conditions, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Coates, I may have misread this, but I couldn't see anything in the conditions that would potentially mitigate against the impact on the Cockerton Centre. I don't know whether that's purely based on the reasons the members gave last time. Now, we've received that letter which you've read out from the co-op, and the co-op clearly have an axe to grind in this matter, but they are saying quite openly, that this will have a significant impact on their trading. I think it's reasonable for members to assume that that will be true of other retailers in the Cockerton district centre area. We can't anticipate, because we don't have the report, what the potential impact of the Tesco development will be. But it seems essential that we consider the two together rather than allowing one through now and then having a separate application when the dog is already out of the horse is already out of the stables, so to speak. Dogs and kennels, I was going to suggest then. And I just wondered if you could comment on that members, if they so wish, could defer this so that sensibly we could consider everything together.
Through you, Chair, if I may. Just to answer your points, Councillor Wallace, I think during our deliberations, in an ideal world, things could be treated at the same committee or dealt with at the same committee, and that would make some sense. And that is a thought that's offered by the barrister's opinion on behalf of Tesco's, and you read into that whichever way you wish. But I think one of the key thing to consider here is that I think if there had been very either identical or very similar proposals between the Lidl proposal and the Tesco proposal, it would be right and proper, I think, to actually deal with both matters in the way you've suggested, because you're actually comparing two very similar issues at the same time. The argument I've offered members today in the light of the advice that we've received is that they are two completely and utterly different proposals in terms of form and scale. The Tesco's scheme is a bigger operation. The Tesco scheme, by its very nature, will have a different pull, a different catchment area to the Lidl application. So you're not actually comparing eggs with eggs, if you like. They are two separate issues which legitimately could be considered quite separately, because they are separate things. If the two schemes were very similar or identical, the advice I'd offer members, Councillor Wallace, is that they perhaps should be considered together. But I think there is a significant difference here to enable them to be split apart. The other thing I would add, Councillor, just very briefly, in terms of fairness and the ability to move forward, we do have an obligation for everyone to get a fair hearing here, and we have had the application for Lidl for as part of 2 years now, where we've been seeking to bottom out a number of planning issues, and it's taken that long, and to spread it out even further when we now have a minded to approve position by members, in my view, would be rather unfair.
May I come back, Chair, just to further that point?
Yes, okay.
I mean, clearly from the committee, I appreciate that Lidl's may have been kicking their heels for a little while, Mr. Coates, but from a committee point of view, it was only not even the last cycle, it was literally the last meeting, and we're talking about fairly, you suggested the Tesco application might come in or might be dealt with before Christmas, so we're not asking for a very long extension of this matter. And in terms of the applications being dealt with together, officers, I understand legally, are looking at that from the nature of the applications in themselves and what they will be doing. And what I'm wondering is whether the committee could fairly defer on the basis that consider the potential impact on Cockerton. So it's looking at the matter from the other end of the telescope. Both applications are substantial retail developments on the edge of an established local centre. I can't, and I think to thinking about the impact on Cockerton rather than the nature of the applications themselves in narrow detail is the angle or the prism through which we should look at the application. I will be moving something later on, Chair, but clearly other people want to come in. Thank you.
Before I move on to members, Mr. Errington, the solicitor, has asked to come in. Andrew, did you want to say something?
Yeah, yes, thanks, Chair. Just a subtle difference from what Mr. Coates said. He said the legal advice was that the schemes were significantly different. The legal advice is that it's a planning judgment as to whether the schemes are significantly different. So the planning officers have looked at the schemes and come to the decision that they're significantly different, which allows them to be heard separately rather than together. But the legal advice is that that's a planning judgment. It's not the legal advice that they have to be heard separately. I just thought I'd mention. I'm sure that's what Mr. Coates meant, but it made it sound as if the legal advice was that they had to be heard separately, and it's not quite that. It's a planning judgment.
Thank you, Mr. Errington. Now I have a few speakers, and I'm going to read them out in order. Councillor Allen, Cousins, Keir, and Marshall. Councillor Allen.
Thank you, Chair. My observations from the agents for the Tesco application, in my opinion, I don't mind receiving a letter with a bit of a presentation. I do object to then getting emails, and I object to getting telephone calls. That to me smacks of trying to predetermine an application, as is the threat of what I consider blackmail. If you don't go ahead with ours, we won't build anywhere else. I'm sorry, that is not, in my mind, anything that we should be it should either be put before us or that we have a right to decide on. As far as I'm aware, we are here to decide on the applications that are before us today. And that is what I will be making my decisions based on, and nothing from anybody else and from outside undue influence will deter me from that decision making. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Allen. Councillor Cousins.
Oh, yeah. I just want to reiterate probably what Councillor Wallace has said and what I have said at the previous meeting. I just definitely feel that this development, regardless of the conditions, will have absolutely catastrophic impact on Cockerton. Regardless of the co-op, if the co-op goes or any other shop goes, all the business, all the other businesses will suffer. The footfall will drop off, so the other businesses will have huge, it'll impact on them hugely. So I just really do feel that, regardless of any other application coming in, that this one in itself, regardless of the conditions, will impact. Sorry.
Can I just remind members, please? Today, what's before you is the conditions of what you agreed at the last committee. Can we keep the discussion to the conditions, please? Councillor Keir. Andy Keir?
Thank you, Chair. I think we're going over the last meeting, some of the decisions that were being made there, and I appreciate what Councillor Hughes has said. I'm a bit concerned about the co-op letter. The co-op are not interested in any commercial stuff, and then they're going to give you all the commercial reasons why they do not want this particular development to go ahead. I find that really contradictory, what they're saying. The whole letter that they sent in was basically around that a commercial matter, that they may have to do something different. So I find that very strange that they're doing that, and as much as they're saying that they're not interested in the commercial side, when actually everything they did was about it. I think the impact assessment that we went through quite critically, and I think there were both sides of the argument on that at the last meeting, and I think even after that was put forward, I think the decision that came, in my view, I voted against the recommendation from the officers, based on what I believed was the right decision, weighing everything up. And I don't see anything since then that has changed materially to change my mind. And in that vein, whilst I'm here, I would like to propose that we go with a new recommendation, or the recommendation that we accept the conditions that are in the report, and I move that we accept the recommendation of the officers to pass, to save me coming back on and doing that again. Chair.
Thank
I'll
you.
second that.
Sorry, who seconded it?
Councillor Clark.
Councillor Clark, thank you. Councillor Marshall.
Thanks, Chair.
Yeah. Have you got your mic on, Councillor?
Yeah, there you go.
Can't even see you.
Unfortunately, I missed Councillor Wallace's questions after the word pickled, in a bit of a pickle. I missed everything else, but the being in the pickle is where I am a little bit. Could I have clarification of where we are with this meeting? We passed the application last week subject to conditions. I don't think we're here this week to rehear that application. I think we're only here to pass the conditions which have been recommended for acceptance by officers. Could you clarify that, Mr. Coates, please?
Certainly, Councillor Marshall. That's absolutely correct. And as I say, apologies that perhaps I took an awful lot of committee time at the beginning of the process, explaining a little bit of context to this, since members were minded to approve last time around. But I thought it was important, particularly bearing in mind the direct approaches from the Tesco scheme, and indeed the barrister's view on the Tesco scheme, to fully brief members of the position. And the key question here, in my view, is not the merits or otherwise of the case, because members have concluded on that last time around, and that's why they've gone to a minded to approve. The purpose of this is to agree an appropriate set of conditions attached to that minded to approve, and I've also taken the opportunity to fully brief members on what's happened since that minded to approve, and hopefully that's been made very clear. But to be clear, Councillor Marshall, to answer your question, the purpose of this is, yes, to brief you on the bit of context, what's happened since last time, but the instruction to me from officers, from members, was to bring a report back to you which listed appropriate conditions should members be wanting to proceed with this particular application. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Coates. Councillor Clark.
Yeah, it's just observations, really, if you want to hear them. If not, then I'm happy to move on. But we are clearly dealing with two different proposals. It's quite obvious. The proposal that we're looking at today is minuscule in compared to the other proposal that Tesco wanted to bring to the board. Now, I've got a pretty good idea how much a 5,000 square foot discounter will take in sales, as opposed to a 50,000 foot Tesco would take in sales, and it's a fraction. Now, if you put in a hypothetical scenario in the future where, say, Tesco's were on that site, I can guarantee that Lidl would still go ahead and want to go on the other site, because in retail, stores like those, which are polar apart, act as magnets for each other, and there's various examples around the town. West Park, for example, you have an Aldi, you have a Marks and Spencer's. Across the other end of town, you have Aldi, Iceland, Lidl. They do this for a reason. They do it because they act as magnets for each other. Now, I had too, like with Hillary, really object to strong arm tactics from the #1 retailer in the country. Now, to be fair, I think it's disgraceful. And again, I've received letters, email and phone call. They're trying it on, in my opinion, to be honest with you, because the effect of a Lidl on a multi-thousand square foot Tesco is minimal. So, and what you've also got to consider is that the residents want this development. So it's quite clear cut to me, and that's why I've seconded Councillor Keir's motion, and I think that's what we should do.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. Councillor Lee, did you want to ask questions on the?
It's a comment. It's a comment really, which is following Councillor Marshall. Councillor Marshall, I'm pleased you answered that question to get this sorted out. I'm a little surprised actually that the discussion has gone down the way it has. The application was discussed in great detail last time, and Councillor Cousins and I went with the officer's recommendation to refuse the application based on what we thought was sensible grounds. We lost out, as is everyone's right, and we accept that. So I thought, like a lot of people, we were coming to simply discuss these conditions. It concerns me that, by the sound of it, few of our councillors have been seduced by the letters from Tesco's. I think Tesco's application is totally irrelevant. It ought not to be even considered in this application. How we could actually look at them if we brought them to a meeting, one meeting? Do we discuss their commercial merit before we look at the planning application, or would you take one before the other? And common sense would lead, Chair, to a decision possibly made on commercial or what we consider to be commercial terms, the best of the other, which is not based on planning grounds. So we are where we are. The conditions are here in front of us. Looking historically, I think I've probably been on the committee probably longer than anyone else, and there has been times over the years, many instances like this, not as great, but we've had instances where people have planned an estate, planned a house, and then people have stood in front of the committee and said, yeah, but what's going to follow is. But what going to follow is totally irrelevant to committee members. And this same thing follows with Tesco. We have not got a planning application in front of us. We have no idea other than what has been sent to us, which is all out of order. So we must simply make the judgment based on the conditions that we have in front of us on the little site. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. Very well spoken. Now, look, Councillor Wallace, Keir and Hughes, you've still got your hand up. Do you still want to speak? Because I'm going to bring this to a close now because we're going off beat a little bit. Councillor Wallace, have you finished? Is it a question, please, on the conditions to an officer?
No, I'd like to move something, Chair.
Right. Okay. In that case,
but I think Councillor Hughes indicated before me, and Councillor Keir. So,
Councillor Hughes.
Thank you, Chair. I just would like to come back in, not that I'm not easily seduced, Councillor Lee, with ideas, but for me, the reason why I raised this issue was because I found information, and the information was contained in the guidance from the last meeting, and that is the impact assessment. This is from the guidance, impact on any existing, committed, and planned public and private investment. So for me, the reason I raised it isn't to go over something that, in some of your opinion, I lost last time. But for me, it's that we can make the best decisions possible for the people that live in this town. That's why I raised it. So just to clarify that point. But secondly, I thought Councillor Lee had a really good idea about the trees. And I would like to see a condition in there about charging vehicles. So if we're going to plow ahead with our decision that we were minded to make last time, I would like to offer that we include conditions in relation to the trees and also in relation to the charging of vehicles. So kind of a friendly amendment if people are minded to move ahead in any case. But I still believe that if we could delay it, we could possibly make a better decision based on more of the evidence available. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Hughes.
So can I move that? I'd like to move a condition including trees, basically Councillor Lee's point, and also the charging of vehicle stations.
Chair,
to be added.
I put forward a proposal. I have absolutely no objection at all to adding Councillor Hughes's additions into that. If Councillor Marshall, who seconded me, is okay with that as well. I think we need to start looking at that, because obviously I think it's the way, the direction that we should be going. So I would, if Councillor Marshall is good with that, I would accept Councillor. Oh, it was you, John. Councillor Clark. Sorry, if Councillor Clark would accept that, I would have no hesitation in adding those conditions to my proposal.
Yeah, that makes sense. It just makes it a bit cleaner then, doesn't it? So I'll fully support that and second that.
Right, I'm going to ask Mr. Coates if what your view is on that, please, as the planning officer. Can that be all wound up together?
Yeah, certainly. Thanks, Chair. Clearly, that proposal is fine. As Councillor Clark says, it's a much cleaner way of doing that if that's the direction of travel. I wouldn't wish to take any further committee time up in doing a long-winded summary. I think we've aired all the points pretty clearly now. Other than to say that I think it's been a very useful debate. I think it's been a useful debate because it's enabled me to put in front of you those issues that have come along post the minded to approve position from last time around. So I think members are clearly cited on that. And the report that's before you now is based on a very clear instruction from members last time around to bring something to you to facilitate them being able to move forward with their minded to approve. The conditions are there for all to see. I've highlighted the ones which seek to protect, as far as we're able, Cockatton Town Centre by limiting the type of retail developments that can take place from this particular site. And I would offer that those conditions, should they be attached to a minded to approve position, protects the council's position. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Dalton, I wish to hand you over now because I think we're ready to move amendments and things, and you said you wish to do that. Paul?
Chair. Can I just clarify, Chair? We have essentially we have two things on the table. We have Councillor Keir and Councillor Clark's original motion, which they moved, and Councillor Hughes moved an amendment to that with two additional conditions, which I would maybe like to seek Mr. Coates's wording for, so that members are fully aware of what it is that they're voting on those two conditions. And I'm taking it that Councillor Keir is essentially seconding Councillor Hughes's amendment. Would that be correct, Councillor Keir?
Whatever way we go, I think we go forward with one recommendation, one thing, and it is as we are with those two.
That's fine. Just for my notes, just to make sure that I'm clear on that.
That's how it's understood.
Can I just ask Mr. Coates then if we need any wording for those two additional conditions so members are clear on what it is that they're voting on, please?
To come back to you, Chair, I think it's fairly self-explanatory what it involves, and they are pretty standard conditions that I can pull out at some stage. But if members were minded to pause the meeting for a few moments to enable me to draft those up, I'm happily do that. But they are relatively standard conditions. There's nothing contentious in there, and I'm happy to draft those up after the event. It's just how you want to proceed, Chair.
No, I think it's fair that we do take a recess for 5 minutes and let the planning officer draft up what the wording is of the amendment. Thank you.
Happily do that, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll get used to this eventually when it's all finished. I don't know if anybody else's mic's the same, but I've got hollow. It's like double sound, and it's very difficult for me to catch what everybody's saying. So
sorry to interrupt, Chair. We're ready to go.
Thank you. Over to you then, Paul.
I just wanted to know if Mr. Coates has prepared the wording for the 2 additional conditions that he can provide to members.
Dave?
Yeah, I have. The time hasn't been wasted, Paul. We've done it.
And bear in mind that Councillor Wallace also wants to move something.
Chair, do you want me to go forward with that wording?
Yes.
If you just bear with me 1 second. There were 2 issues, one of which related to landscaping, and one of which related to the parking or the charging of electric vehicles. So if you just bear with me 1 second. Right, the condition relating, oh, there we go. The condition relating to landscaping is a fairly, it is a standard condition, but nevertheless, if I may read it out, Chair, for everybody's benefit, it says a landscaping scheme shall be submitted to and approved in writing by the local planning authority prior to any works commencing, and upon approval of such schemes, it shall be fully implemented concurrently with the carrying out of the development or within such extended period as may be agreed in writing by the local planning authority. And thereafter, any trees or shrubs removed, dying, severely damaged or becoming seriously diseased shall be replaced and the landscaping scheme maintained for a period of 5 years to the satisfaction of the local planning authority. And the reason for that is to ensure a satisfactory appearance of the site in the interests of the visual amenities of the area. I'm happy to send that on, Paul. I'm sure you're not that quick a writer, but I'll make sure that that's sent on to you should members be minded to accept that. The other issue is regarding vehicle charging, and the suggested wording for that, Chair, is prior to the occupation of any part of the development hereby approved, a scheme to make provision for the charging of electric vehicles shall be submitted and approved by the LPA and thereafter implemented and maintained for the lifetime of the development. And the reason for that is to comply with the relevant paragraph in the National Planning Framework, which, with members' permission, I'll insert at a later date. But that's the wording of both conditions. Thanks, Chair.
All right, Paul.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to clarify whether anybody wanted to move anything further at this stage.
Councillor Wallace, I think you did, didn't you?
Yes, Chair. I feel we do need to test the points that a number of the reservations a number of members have had. Just to reassure Councillor Clark and Councillor Marshall and Councillor Lee, I'm certainly not looking to relitigate this matter. I accept the way the committee, though I voted the other way, how the committee voted last time, and this development will go ahead. However, members should be mindful that their new information has come to light, which is relevant to the conditions that we are seeking to apply today. Firstly, we have the letter from the co-op that has been read out, I don't think we can simply dismiss it in the way that Councillor Clark has sought to do. I think we do need to bear it in mind and reflect on it fairly. And indeed, whatever we may think about the Tesco's approaches to members, and certainly I wasn't seduced by them any more than Councillor Hughes was. We need to bear in mind that application is imminent. I also believe it's relevant that that the conditions make no mention of any mitigation of the impact on the Cockton District Centre, and members of this committee should be as vigilant about the protection of Cockton District Centre as members of this committee have been historically over the years, the protection of the town centre. And I think we would be remiss. I do feel that these conditions are remiss in that point, and certainly they would benefit from being heard at the same time, at the same meeting. How that meeting was run will be a matter for the officers and for you, Chair. But I believe that these conditions would be strengthened and would be beneficial to be heard a long time at the same time as the imminent Tesco application. So I move that this matter, these conditions, be moved to be deferred so that they can be considered in line or at the same meeting as the Tesco application. Thank you, Chair.
Can I second that?
Councillor Hislop, you're seconding. Councillor Wallace?
Yes.
Okay.
Jack, could I just have a bit of point of clarification?
Yes.
Councillor Lee. Just following Councillor Wallace's point, as we were minded to grant at the last planning meeting, one would assume that we've given approval to grant subject to these conditions. So the grant application has been approved. So what we're now simply voting on are whether these conditions are acceptable to the approval that we've given a month ago. Is that the case?
That is correct, Councillor Lee, yes.
Right. Well, I'm just going to throw another one now, and without being pedantic, on the landscaping. The landscaping, as Mr. Coates has said, is a standard one. I'm very conscious that when supermarkets of this type do build, their landscaping consists of low-growing shrubs, which don't do anything to improve the environment, but they are landscaping in a formal way. But what they do tend to do is simply grab the litter, and nobody cleans about. So I do think when our planning officers are actually getting down to nitty-gritty, that we are talking about trees going across that front edge and not shrubs.
Mr. Dalton, can we move over to fold all this together, please?
Are you wanting to move to a vote on Councillor Wallace's amendment, Chair? Is that where we're going, or are you wanting to have a debate on Councillor Wallace's amendment?
I don't think anybody has anything further to say on the amendment. I think Councillor Kerr, your hand's gone up. Do you want to say more, Councillor Kerr? No.
No, that was left up from the last time. Sorry.
All right, Councillor Marshall, have you just left your hand up?
No, I'd just like to query Councillor Wallace's motion that is moved. If at the last meeting, this is for clarification, just so we know where we are, because I'm quite confused, I'll be honest with you. If at the last meeting we made a decision to agree subject to conditions, can we now, as a committee, vote on a motion to defer that decision? Can somebody clarify that for me, please?
I'll ask Mr. Coates to do that for you, Councillor Marshall.
Thanks, Chair. You're quite right, Councillor Marshall. There was a minded to approve decision last time, and there was a specific instruction given to me to come back with the relevant set of conditions based on that decision by members to be minded to approve. I've come back with that list of conditions for members as instructed, and as far as I'm concerned, notwithstanding I've outlined the background to changes which have occurred since that minded to approve position. I've outlined that. And if members were minded to change that minded to approve position or defer that position, of course they could do that. Of course they could. But the last instruction I've got from members was to bring this report back to you, which is before you. And my hope was that the members would make a decision based on what's in front of them.
Thanks, David. Thanks for clarifying that. Yeah.
Thank you.
I think it's been thoroughly aired now. Has anybody any relevant questions to this that they're not clear on before Paul takes it all to the amendment and the vote? No, because there's Councillor Tuscoven. I think your hand suddenly popped up. Councillor Tuscoven? No. Can you please check that your hands are down if you don't wish to speak, because it's there's hands flying up all over the place here, and you've already all spoken. Councillor Hughes, you've spoken, so I don't suppose you need anything more to say, do you?
Just a quick thing, Chair. Minded to approve does not mean it has been approved. So that is the bottom line. It does not mean it has been approved.
Thank you.
So that's all I want to say. But
thank you.
Clearly, thanks.
Councillor Tuscoven, your hand is up. I don't think she's even here. No.
Chair, I think Councillor Tostman might be having some issues with her microphone, because her microphone is actually open, but obviously we can't hear her. If Councillor Tostman can just hear me, I wonder if she could just check to make sure that the wire is fully inserted into her laptop, just to make sure it's okay.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you now, Councillor, yes.
Yes, right, okay. My question really was just to clarify from Mr. Coates what was meant by an imminent application from Tesco, given the fact that Aldi's application took the best part of 2 years to be brought to the planning committee, and we're talking about another application coming forward quite quickly. Have Tesco been working on theirs for 2 years, or are we just assuming that it's going to appear imminently?
Through you, Chair. Just to clarify, we've had the application from Tesco's since the 25th of September. We're in the process of going through the same process as we did with the Lidl application, by engaging retail planning consultants and making other judgments based on highway network issues. So my hope was to bring, as indicated in the presentation, was to bring it to members fairly speedily, but there are no guarantees, because there's all sorts of assessments that need to be made on that particular application. So the hope was December or perhaps January, but there's no absolute guarantees with that. It depends how that negotiation on the Tesco application pans out. But it is an application that's submitted, Councillor. It was submitted on the 25th of September. And it's in the very early stages of negotiation. Just to add to that, which is, I think I touched on a little bit earlier, is that we have a responsibility to make decisions for all parties, and there is a responsibility to make a decision on the Lidl application, in my view, as there is on the Tesco's application, and we will make a decision on both applications in due course. But I think in terms of fairness and balance, there's nothing I've heard to date which would indicate we have to delay any decision today, and that's hopefully what I've made fairly clear in my presentation on the legal opinion that we've taken, which helps members arrive at an informed decision. So there is a balance to be had, but we have a responsibility to applicants to make as speedy a decision as possible, Councillor.
Thank you.
Thank
I
you.
mean, I would suggest that that is the correct course of action. But having said that, I would just wanted to clarify that imminent doesn't always mean imminent. And if a previous application takes 2 years to bring to the table, there's no guarantee that something's going to appear before Christmas or even next Christmas. Therefore, we need to make a decision on what is in front of us today.
Just to confirm, Councillor, through you, Chair, that's a good terminology. There's no guarantee of anything. I'm not sitting here in front of you today saying an application will come. It will come, the Tesco application rather, it will be presented to members when it's ready to do so. And the hope is it's done as quickly as possible, but that's very much dependent on how that negotiated process moves forward.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Can I now move to ask Paul to coordinate the votes, please, Paul?
Yep, no problem, Chair. Yes, no problem, Chair. OK, so the first vote that we're going to take is on the amendment. It was moved by Councillor Wallace and seconded by Councillor Heslop, and that's that the matters be deferred and be considered in line with the Tesco application. So as we have in previous meetings, I'm going to go through with a roll call. You can indicate whether you're for or against the motion. Councillor Allen.
Against.
Councillor Clark.
Against.
Councillor Cousins.
For.
Councillor Heslop.
For.
Councillor Cindy Hughes.
For.
Councillor Charles Johnson.
Against.
Against. Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Mrs. Doris Jones.
Against.
Councillor Keir.
Against.
Councillor Lee.
Against.
Councillor Lister has submitted her apologies for the meeting. Councillor Marshall.
Against.
Councillor McCollum.
Against.
Councillor Tate.
Against.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Tostivan.
Against.
Councillor Wallace.
For.
Thank you. If you bear with me a moment, please. OK, Chair, so that's 4 votes for the amendment, 10 votes against. The amendment has fallen. We then go back to the previous motion, which was the officer recommendation with the addition of 2 conditions, which Mr. Coates read out earlier. Would you like me to move straight to the vote on that one, Chair?
Yes, please.
Sorry, Chair, if I may just interject very quickly. That also includes it's subject to the signing of the 106 agreement, as set out in the recommendation. So it would still be a minded to approve position subject to all these conditions, but the only outstanding issue, of course, would be the signing up of the 106 agreement, which has been negotiated. Thank you.
Over to you, Paul.
OK, thank you, Chair. So again, we'll go through the vote. I'll call names out, and if you can indicate whether you're for or against the motion. Councillor Allen.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Clark.
For.
Councillor Cousins.
Against.
Councillor Heslop.
Against.
Councillor Cindy Hughes.
For.
Councillor Charles Johnson.
Lost you again, Charles.
For.
Charles.
For. Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Councillor Mrs. Doris Jones.
For.
Councillor Keir.
For.
Councillor Lee.
For.
Councillor Lister's not with us. Councillor Marshall.
For.
Councillor McCollum.
For.
Councillor Tate.
For.
Councillor Tostivan.
For.
And Councillor Wallace.
Abstain.
Thank you, Councillor. If you bear with me a moment, please, Chair. OK, Chair, so that's 11 votes for the motion, 2 votes against and 1 abstention. The motion's now carried. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Paul. Can we now move on from that to the next application, which is Prospect House, Middleton Road, Sadburge? And again, Mr. Coates will take us through that. Sorry, folks, but we're having dreadful connection problems. I've got echoing going on. Lost you at one point, then you come back. And now Mr. Coates has got problems. Can you just bear with us for a moment, please, so we can sort out the technicalities?
Can
I can hear you.
Can you hear me, Chair?
Yeah. Got you.
We're on. We're out. Fantastic.
Right. Prospect House, Middleton Road, Sadburge.
Thank you, Chair. That's me again. This is an application. We'll just get the screens up. This is an application in Sadburge, Prospect House, Middleton Road. And the next screen, please, Mike. Oops. That's it. It's a property at the end of a long terrace near the Buck Inn in Sadburge, set in a fairly large curtilage. It's the demolition of an existing conservatory and the erection of a two-storey rear extension, and the erection of a canopy over a patio. Includes the demolition of an outbuilding and the erection of a single-storey annex towards the rear. Next slide, please, Mike. That's an aerial shot of Prospect House, and it's fairly extensive grounds. It is located within the Sadburge Conservation Area, and in fairly close proximity to Thorn Cottage, which is a Grade 2 listed building. The rear annex would be for, it's not a separate dwelling. I think that there is some fear amongst objectors that it would be used as a separate dwelling, but it is for the enjoyment of the family within the existing property, and there is an appropriate condition within the recommendation which ties that in. Next slide, please, Mike. The proposed extension would project 2.8 metres to the rear. The materials would be rendered white with UPVC windows, and the annex would be reclaimed brick to match the existing. There are no issues in terms of the highways officer. There is sufficient parking in that fairly extensive curtilage area, as you saw. The parish council have objected to the scheme. Major reservations about the impact on neighbouring properties. We have consulted our conservation officer, who doesn't consider that the proposal would have any significant impact on the conservation area, so that is satisfactory. Results of consultation and publicity: there have been 4 properties consulted, and 4 objections have been received. If you wouldn't mind just flipping that back one, Mike, just to show those objection areas, that you can see those objections that have been received from the property at the rear, the red triangles, and the properties to the north. The conservation officer considers that whilst the area, it is a fairly large extension. You can move back to that elevations once, please, Mike. At the rear of the property, he does not consider it would have any significant impact on the character of the conservation area. Members will probably recall this was deferred from a previous meeting, because there were some issues around the accuracy of plans, which have now been regularised, and it was also an issue that was withdrawn because of COVID, when we weren't actually visiting people's properties, or certainly weren't entering into people's properties. That's now being done under very strict social distancing arrangements, so that the reason for being withdrawn last time around has been removed. There was some issue around a listed wall. If you just go back one, Mike, or is it next one on? I think. Sorry, next one on. Listed wall. You can see the separate annex at the bottom right of the screen. That was the area where a number of residents felt it may be used as a separate dwelling, but there is an appropriate condition within the recommendation to prevent that from occurring. The listed wall I was referring to is literally where that downward pointing red line arrow is. It is very close to this annex, the potential annex. There is a condition attached within condition 35, which talks about, so on page 35, beg your pardon, condition number 4, which seeks sort of care being taken while that work is being undertaken, so as not to damage the listed wall. That listed wall isn't in the ownership of this applicant. So should members be minded to approve this, condition 4, I would suggest, is taken out, for the simple reason that it'd be inappropriate to add a condition or include a condition on any approval where the applicant doesn't have any effective control over its implementation. So instead of condition 4, which I'm suggesting should be removed, I've suggested an informative be put on at the end of the decision notice. It's not a condition, but it's an awareness from as far as the council are concerned, bringing the applicant's attention to the importance of the curtilage listed wall and the importance of treating it carefully. We've also we haven't been idle since the non-presentation of this application previously, and we have been in contact with the applicant, and more particularly the applicant's agent, who've submitted a structural report in relation to the methodology on that boundary wall, which is proved to be who's from a conservation accredited engineer, Bruce Horsburgh, and we accept the contents of that structural report, and how that methodology and how the building out, or more particularly the building of foundations in close proximity to that listed wall, should take place. The recommendation, Chair, or just prior to moving to that, you'll see on the plan that's in front of you there is a 45-degree line struck for the most adjacent property across the proposed extension. The closest window on that property is in fact a bathroom. So it's something that I would ask members to take into account in their considerations. But other than that, the recommendation, Chair, is to grant planning permission. We feel it is an appropriate addition to a building within a conservation area. We feel it does respect, just the previous one, Mike, if you would please. We do think it's an extension which does fit in to the conservation area. It does respect people's residential amenity, and also in terms of the protection of the listed wall, which is adjacent to the annex. We feel adequate safeguards are in place in terms of the structural report that's been submitted fairly recently to ensure that work is undertaken carefully to protect that listed building. So the recommendation, Chair, is to grant planning permission. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Coates.
Right, can you all hear me properly now? I believe we have the parish councillor from Sadburge Parish here. Steve Barker, is it? No. Steve Barker.
Chair, if you can hear me,
Yes.
I'm not from the parish council. I'm assisting the applicant if members require any assistance.
Right, that's fine. Okay, Mr. Barker. Any questions on this from members to Mr. Barker? No? Fine. Okay. Councillor Marshall.
Thanks, Chair. It's just with reference to condition 4 about protecting the listed wall and removing that condition. I notice as the wall comes round, there's a minimum 500mm gap between the annex and I guess it's a wall. Could we not have any a condition to limit the encroachment distance to the listed wall for the annex, just to make sure it doesn't get damaged during construction?
Through you, Chair, if I may. The reason that condition I'm suggesting could be removed, Councillor Marshall, is that I think it would be inappropriate to place a condition, particularly on the applicant, on this permission, where they don't physically have control over the implementation of that condition. Notwithstanding the fact if they do damage that wall, a listed wall, that there is other consequences of that. You know, the listed building consent could be required, or there could be some more drastic action in terms of a listed building enforcement notice. But I think the important thing at this stage, I mean, my hope, and it's certainly been backed up by the structural engineers report that's been submitted, that won't occur. I don't think that will occur, but nevertheless, I think it's important as far as we're concerned in terms of being responsible when we consider these things, is to bring that issue to the applicant's attention. I think the most appropriate way of doing that is rather by a condition, is by the informative which you see on page 36. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Barker. Do you want to add anything to that as an answer? Just a direct answer.
No, just Mr. Coates is absolutely right. The engineers had a look at the wall. We know exactly how we're going to tackle the project, and as long as there's a degree of common sense on the part of both parties looking after both sides of the wall, we're all absolutely confident that it can be there for another 100 years.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Chair. Just for clarification, I think really looking at the objections by on page 32, there's reference there to the height of the proposed annex and overlooking issues. Am I missing something here? But I can't really see why those comments should be made. I mean, so the question really is there something in there which I can't see from the drawings that we've been shown?
No.
Through you,
Courts, please.
Through you, Chair, just very briefly. No, I'm absolutely satisfied that there are no issues in terms of overlooking, Councillor Lee, that they would justify any reason for refusing permission. We're perfectly satisfied that all those issues have been satisfactorily addressed. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, if there are no further questions from members, I would like Mr. Coates to sum up, please.
Nothing further to add, Chair, other than I'll just hopefully it's now indeed made clear the reason for removing condition number 4. It seemed like a good idea at the time, but because we weren't fully aware of that ownership issue at the back, and now that it's quite clear that listed wall at the back of the annex isn't in the control or ownership of the applicant. It would be inappropriate to put that condition number 4 in, so I'm requesting that is removed. It's not ignoring the significance of that particular issue. That's why I think the most appropriate mechanism of bringing that to the applicant's attention is the insertion of the informative, which is on the bottom on page 36, but nothing further to add. Thank you, Chair.
All right, I think I can see the hand up from Councillor McCollum. Councillor McCollum.
Thank you, Chair. I beg to move the report as advised by Mr. Coates with the removal of condition 4.
Do you have a seconder?
Seconded.
Thank you. Any further questions to officers, or anybody want to move anything else before we move on? Have you said your final comments, Mr. Coates?
Yeah, yes, thank you, Chair. Thank you.
Right. Can we move now to the vote? Take the vote, please. But before we do that, can I move to Mr. Dalton, please, who will take the names of the votes? Thank you.
Yes, no problem, Chair. So we're voting on the motion moved by Councillor McCollum, and that's the officer recommendations as detailed on pages 34 to 36, but with the removal of condition number 4. So as before, I'll go through the names if you can indicate whether you're for or against the motion. Councillor Allen.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Clark.
For.
Councillor Cousins.
For.
Councillor Heslop. Are you there, Councillor Heslop?
No.
I'll come back to you at the end of the vote, Councillor. Councillor Cindy Hughes.
For.
Councillor Charles Johnson. Councillor Johnson.
For.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Mrs. Doris Jones.
For.
Councillor Andy Keir.
For.
Councillor Lee.
For.
Councillor Marshall.
For.
Councillor McCollum.
For.
Councillor Tate.
For.
Councillor Tostovan.
For.
And Councillor Wallace.
When I say for, Chair, can I also say that I understand Councillor Heslop's mouse isn't working, which is why he was unable to respond. I don't know whether we can go back to him.
I'll go back to him after yourself, Councillor.
So, yes, it was for.
For, thank you. And Councillor Heslop?
Perhaps Councillor Heslop could put his hand up if we can't hear him.
Yeah.
For. A thumbs up for and a thumbs down against. I think that's the best we can suggest.
If Councillor Heslop can access the chat facility in the meeting, I can happily take a vote that way.
If his mouse isn't working, he's not going to be able to move, is he?
Possibly.
No.
His touchscreen isn't working either.
Can we not just go on that, Chair, with the majority vote anyway? Is that legally acceptable? One way, one either way doesn't make much difference. No disrespect, Councillor Heslop.
I mean, if you're happy to proceed, Chair, without Councillor Heslop's vote, I mean, obviously, other than that, it's. Oh, sorry, Councillor Heslop, are you with us again?
Yes. The answer is for, but the whole screen, my mouse and the computer, everything froze. Had to come out and switch it all back on, so I couldn't indicate anything.
Okay, no problem.
Thanks
I can register your vote for 4 then. Thank you very much. That's carried unanimously, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, that's agreed. Thank you, members. If we can now move on to 5C, which is Marchbank School, Barnes Road. And I think Lisa's going to do this one. Are you, Lisa?
I am. Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, members. Michael, can we have the first slide, please, which I think is number 13. So it's Marchbank School and it's page 39 on the agenda papers. So this just shows the general location of the site. So it's Marchbank School and it's on the boundary of the former Mowden Hall site, which is now being developed by Linden Homes. Next slide, please, Michael. Sorry, it's not moving on for me, but there we go. Sorry. So this shows the site in more detail. So it's 4 trees indicated by the red dots on the northern extent of the Marchbank School site, and the area greyed out just to the north is the housing site. So those trees are protected by tree preservation order, as are a number in the vicinity, and it's proposed to crown lift those 4 trees, which overhang 3 plots on the southern boundary of the housing site to allow light into the rear gardens. So just moving on to the next slide, please, Michael. So this shows it in more detail. So it's the trees that are highlighted A, B, C, and tree 41 in yellow. Reference to other trees has been omitted from the application. It's been amended since first submitted in response to concerns by the council's arboricultural officer. So it's just those 4 trees that you can see highlighted in yellow there, and you can see the relationship to plots 13, 14, and 15. So if we can, so basically, sorry, if I can just outline the works, it's to crown raise those trees to a height of 6 and 7 metres. So to remove the lower branches from the base upwards up to give a clearance of 6 and 7 metres over the rear of those properties. So if I can just quickly summarise the consultation responses, and I think, Michael, if we could just nip back to slide 14, that will show you the extent of comments received. We received 3 objections with the red triangle, and I think it's fair to say that those objections related principally to the original proposal, which also included trees along the western boundary adjacent to those properties on Hallview Grove, but they've been omitted now from this application. So as I clarified, no objection from the arboricultural officer on the basis of the amended scheme, 3 letters of objection, and those objections relate to concerns about that the architects of the housing development should have planned the layout to allow sufficient light into the gardens, potential loss of privacy between proposed houses and existing properties surrounding the site. And I think, just to make clear, I think those concerns related to when the scheme proposed works of trees on that western boundary adjacent to Hallview Grove. The trees shouldn't be cut back just to provide more light into the gardens, and that branches should only be removed from the sides facing the new houses. So in terms of planning issues, the main issue really in assessing whether the proposed pruning works are acceptable is the impact that they'll have on the health and stability of the trees and the amenity value of those trees in the wider landscape. So the pruning works will involve the removal of a number of lower branches, and I must state that the majority of those branches to be removed is deadwood, and that can be removed without consent. So the issue is that once that permitted deadwood is removed, that will leave a small number of live branches remaining, which, in the opinion of the arboricultural officer, will be exposed and would be prone to wind damage, and therefore it's safest to remove those branches. If we just skip forward to the photographs, Michael, which I think is maybe 16, thank you. So these 3 photographs show the trees. So from left to right, there's tree 41, which is a Wellingtonia, tree A, sycamore, and trees B and C, which are western red cedars. So the lower branches will be removed up to a height of 7 metres, as I say, the majority of which is dead wood. But in the opinion of the arboricultural officer, that work can be done satisfactorily without significantly altering the shape of the tree or affecting its health and stability, and the trees retain their amenity value in the wider landscape. So no objection from the arboricultural officer. And just to stress that the concerns regarding privacy did relate to when the scheme included trees along the western boundary. The distance between the properties you can see on the photograph on the left and the school is some distance away, so that these works don't give rise to any privacy issues. So the recommendation is to grant, subject to conditions set out on pages 41 and 42, and they're fairly standard conditions insofar as tree applications relate, that work has to be carried out within 2 years, and that the work's undertaken in accordance with the arboricultural report and to the recommended standards. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Ward councillors, you've 2 ward councillors on this one. Do either of you wish to come in and say anything? Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. It's more of a general comment, really. Why is it that we are quite prepared to carry out works on trees when it's a developer wanting the job done, and yet we have a similar situation throughout Darlington, where these trees are imposing upon residents and we turn it down? It seems to be that we're offering double standards here. I'd like to know why.
Lisa?
Through you, Chair. Having looked at the work proposed and considered the comments of the arboricultural officer, regardless of I think who the applicant is here, I think he was at quite pains to stress that a lot of the work is the removal of dead wood, which can be done anyway without consent, and the remaining few live branches that will be left would be exposed. There is an issue here in terms of, I think there's a benefit to removing those remaining live branches for the long-term health and stability of the trees. And because it relates to the lower branches of the trees, and really the amenity value of these trees is in the wider distance, those alterations really wouldn't be the impact of those alterations really wouldn't have any significant effect on the character, the appearance, the amenity value of those trees. So setting aside whether it's a private developer or a resident, you know, the reason for that work being acceptable is quite clear here. The majority of it is deadwood, which can be removed without consent, and the rest of the work will have a fairly minimal impact on the trees. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Wallace, I think you're next, indicated to speak next.
Yep. Thank you, Chair. Just to completely agree with the sentiments expressed by Councillor Johnson. And just to say, Councillor Johnson, you may be reassured that scrutiny in considering the draft tree strategy has recommended that the officers consider a quality of life, the impact of trees on the quality of life of residents, including pruning matters, which hopefully will mean that there's a levelling up of the playing field between what we seem to be prepared to do for developers, but it's rather different sometimes when it comes to residents and established trees. So something will be coming to Cabinet, I understand, fairly soon. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Wallace. Councillor Tate. Councillor Tate.
Thank you, Chair. It was just to mirror the comments made by Councillor Johnson and Councillor Wallace. I also am struggling with a tree which is right on a property boundary, and it's actually a tree that sits within one of our cemeteries. I've been invited round. If you're sat in their back garden or you're sat in their dining room, there's actually no natural light during the day, and our Phil Haynes, the tree man, will not do anything to it because it's a healthy tree. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Tate. Perhaps that's something you could take up privately in the town hall. Councillor Tuscoven.
Again, to mirror the comments that have already been made, but also to point out that trees continue to grow, and therefore there will be an ongoing problem, and who is actually going to be responsible for that ongoing problem as time goes on? Is it a residential problem, or is it the school's problem? Really, that needs to be considered, and I hope any purchaser of property takes that on board at the time when they are making that purchase.
Thank you, Councillor Tuscoven. Councillor Hughes.
Thank you, Chair. I'm a little bit confused because I think that this report, in my reading, is actually consistent with our policy on trees, in the sense that results of the technical consultation, there were issues like the cutting back of trees just to provide light for residents, no matter how important that is, which I agree it is important in the lives of residents. But the arboricultural officer said that he couldn't go along with that, and that was removed from this application. So I think that this application itself is just getting rid of dead wood, which could have been done without reference to us, and just making these trees safe. So I agree that there are issues that I think scrutiny should be looking at, and I applaud that. But I think this report is actually consistent with the Council's policy. And in fact, I'd like to move the officer's recommendation.
Thank you. Do you want to come in on that one, Lisa? Do you want to answer Councillor Hughes?
Well, yes, just to say that I think the issue here is that, you know, the issue is that, you know, the removal of the deadwood and the remaining live branches, and it's done in the interest of the stability and health of the trees, as opposed to being principally to allow light into the rear gardens, which I guess was the developer's intention in making the application. But the decision has been more so made on the fact that it's removal of deadwood, which can be done without consent, and the impact of the remaining one or two branches that would be left as a result.
Thank you. And I see no more hands. Planning officer, I think you've just about summarised everything on this one.
More to say.
Right, no further debate on this. I think we can go straight to a vote. Paul.
Chair, is there a
seconder yet?
I was just about to ask if someone could second their
I will
councillor.
second.
I'll second, yeah.
Oh, they're all fighting to second you, Cindy. You've got plenty seconders. Okay, who's going to be the one to second it? Whose name?
I'm sure I heard Councillor McCollum, I think, first of all.
McCollum? Fine. Okay. Seconded by Councillor McCollum. Paul, can you check the names, please? Do
No
the roll
problem.
call.
If there's nothing further, again, we'll take a vote, and it's the recommendation is to grant, subject to the conditions outlined on page 41 and page 42 of the submitted report. Councillor Allen.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Clark.
4.
Councillor Cousins.
4.
Councillor Heslop.
4.
Councillor Cindy Hughes.
4.
Councillor Charles Johnson.
Abstain.
Councillor Mrs Doris Jones.
4.
Councillor Keir.
4.
Councillor Lee.
4.
Councillor Marshall.
4.
Councillor McCollum.
4.
Councillor Tate.
4.
Councillor Tosterman.
4.
And Councillor Wallace.
4.
Thank you. If you bear with me, Madam Chair. Okay, Chair, that's 13 votes for the motion, 1 abstention. The motion's carried. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That moves us on to Staindrop Road, Darlington. Lisa, that's you again, is it?
It is, thank you, Chair. So this is the Mowden Public House on Staindrop Road, page 45 in the agenda. And if we could go to slide 17, please, Michael. So this just shows that the general location of the site, and on to the next one, thank you. So this shows the Mowden Public House, the large building in the centre of the screen, on the south side of Staindrop Road and to the east of, west of Barnes Road. So it's the residential properties to the left, numbers 1 to 4 of Boundary View, and other residential properties on Barnes Road to the east. So obviously the pub is set in quite large grounds. The extensive car parking area to the south and to the east side, and the area that's outlined in red, or part of that, is an existing external seating area. If we just move on to the aerial shot, please, Michael, perhaps show it in a bit more context. So the greyed area to the front of the building is an existing external seating area, and the purpose of the red outline is to denote an area where it's proposed to erect an external timber canopy over part of that external seating area to the front or north elevation of the public house. And that is to enclose part of that seating area, as I explained. It's to be timber constructed canopy, and it is to be stained grey to match the colour scheme of the public house, and will consist of a central pitched tile section approximately 5.3 metres in height, with shallower monopitch sections to either side. And if we can just move on to the next slide, I think that probably will show it in more detail. There we go. So top right is existing front elevation, and the top left is a side elevation, and the areas outlined in red show the extent of the proposed canopy. So it's designed to mirror that pitch over the front door in terms of height and form. So that'll be the central pitch section I referred to, with 2 monopitched areas to the side. So approximately 5.3 metres in height at its highest point, and then sloping down at the side to just over 3 metres in height. And so it is approximately 13 metres wide and project approximately 16 metres from the front. And the intention of the canopy is to cover approximately 6 to 8 existing tables, to allow customers to dine outside, obviously in view of the current pandemic and restrictions that are in place, to allow them to meet social distancing restrictions both internally and externally. However, I must stress that the canopy is intended to be a long-term feature, so we'll be here after current restrictions are listed. So if we just turn to the results of consultation and publicity, and there's quite a bit to update here, Chair. So on page 46, no objections in principle from the Council's Highway Engineer or Environmental Health Officer. A total of 3 letters of objection have been received, and that they're from the occupants of Boundary View, numbers 1, 2 and 3. And they are raising the following concerns relating to noise impacts, negative impact on the quality of life, increased traffic, reduction of light to home and restriction of outlook, existing problem with odours from drains, may block view of oncoming traffic when leaving the driveways, not in keeping with the local area, potential for air pollution from heaters, and would be better placed on an alternative side of the building, and also concerns about rubbish. There's been 10 letters of support, and they raise the following points: that the business has always been considerate to neighbours. They take all appropriate steps to minimise noise. Covered area will provide a welcome social space for patrons at a difficult time, essential to the continued existence of the pub, an important part of the local community. COVID has had a major impact on the business, and this investment will help it to keep going and to obey social distancing rules. It's of an attractive design, will provide a tidier, cleaner look to the current outdoor area and enhance the area. there have been some additional comments received since the agenda was published. If I can just take some time, Chair, just to run quickly through those. So we've had further comments from, as I said, the three existing objectors, so they're the residents of numbers 1, 2 and 3 boundary view. And if I can just summarise the points that they're raising, many of which have been raised previously, but I'll just quickly run over those again. Concern about noise. If the pub increases, we could see increased traffic. The canopy will undoubtedly result in a reduction of light to our home and restrict our view. Concerns about overlooking, loss of privacy and a visually overbearing impact from the canopy, blocking view of oncoming traffic. It's not in keeping aesthetically with the surrounding area. Mention of lights in the fire pit are not environmentally friendly, and air pollution with excess fumes from more patrons' vehicles and deliveries. And again, noise disturbance and nuisance to the detrimental of residential amenity. Again, concerns about the structure and its siting, and a request that if the structure is needed to deal with the difficult COVID times, that they would argue a permanent structure is not required, and a temporary structure should be looked at as an alternative. Increased noise levels since the coronavirus and people sitting outside to the front of the pub until closing time. And a permanent structure with heaters will make this a year-round misery. Again, concerns about rubbish, lighting, heating, and parking and drains. And the final comment from one of the objectors that the structure will have a long-term effect on them all, and that they're hoping a compromise can be achieved. Concerned about fire pits, outside music and noisy gatherings, and feel like a non-stop party is taking place every night, and they would like the structure moving away from their homes. There's been one further letter of support and from nearby residents on Q Rise, and they hope that the application be granted. They consider the facility to be much appreciated by the local community as an area to meet outside with some protection during winter months. And a final comment from the agent in response to the committee report and the recommendation. You'll see as we go through the report, there's a recommendation that an acoustic fence be erected alongside the western boundary adjacent to the properties on Boundary View, a 2-metre high acoustic fence. And they're concerned that to have to rip down the existing 1.5 metre high fence and replace it with a new 2-metre fence would be inappropriate, given that no previous complaints have been made about the operation of the business. The day-to-day usage of the business will not change, and given the current economic climate, this will severely restrict profitability and viability of the business. And they request that, if possible, could the condition be reworded such that should any nuisance be found within 12 months, that the fence must then be erected. So they are the additional comments received. So if we just go through the main body of the report, so we just move on to slides, the photographs, please, Michael, which I think are slides 20. Sorry, so that's just a visualisation of the canopy. So continuing the peak in front of the front door to the property, and the two shallow monopitch sections to the side to cover part of the external existing seating area. And if we just move on to the photographs. So that's the front shot of the public house at the moment. So in terms of visual amenity, as I've described, it will be situated centrally to the front of the public house, and has been designed to mirror the pitched roof above the main entrance. The property is set back on a sizable plot. It doesn't is set back from the road, and the sort of scale and design of the canopy is considered to be in keeping with the property, and wouldn't be unduly with the surrounding area, such that it appears to be particularly discordant with the surrounding area. So in officers' view, there is no real significant impact in visual amenity terms. As you've heard, the objections principally relate to noise, nuisance and disturbing arising from the use of the canopy, particularly during the evening hours, as well as concerns regarding loss of light, privacy and outlook from the neighbouring properties to the west. And as I said before, this existing outdoor seating area has previously been used for outdoor drinking, as you can see on the photographs. There's tables there at the moment, but clearly this would be very much weather dependent, and the canopy would allow this area to be used continually during spells of colder weather and into the darker nights as well. But it doesn't cover the entire seating area. It would cover approximately 6 to 8 tables. So in light of the objections that have been received, the Environmental Health Officer has recommended conditions restricting the use of the canopy until 10 p.m. and also restricting the playing of amplified music and sound outside of the premises. And what I would stress is that the property is subject to a premises licence, which permits the sale of alcohol on and off the premises until midnight, and also does allow the playing of music outside until 11 p.m. But any conditions that would be attached to this effect would only cover the canopy. It wouldn't cover the area surrounding that. So effectively, any breach of that condition would be remedied by a patron stepping literally a metre outside of the canopy, potentially further to the west towards the properties on boundary view, and they would comply with the terms of the licence. There'd be no breach of the planning condition because they would be away from that canopy area. So we've got a situation there where part of the site would be restricted by condition potentially, and the rest of it will be subject to the restrictions of the premises licence. So in planning terms, that leaves us with conditions that are effectively unreasonable and difficult to enforce. So the canopy, the area under the canopy, would be covered by the existing licence, and officers are of the view that these matters are best controlled by the premises licence rather than by planning condition, and any complaints relating to noise, nuisance and disturbance or breach of the premises licence would be investigated by the Council's licensing department and environmental health section. The Environmental Health Officer has confirmed that no noise complaints have been received to date regarding the use of that outside seating area. And members may recall a few months back they gave consideration to a similar scenario at the Devonport, at Middleton One Row, an outside seating area where we had a similar situation that, should members be minded to agree to the use of such conditions, you'd end up with this unusual situation where those conditions would only apply to part of the area, and that stepping literally a few metres or a metre away from that canopy, those conditions wouldn't apply. That aside, the Environmental Health Officer does recommend that a 2-metre acoustic fence be erected along the western boundary adjacent to boundary view. And if we can just move to the next slide, Michael, we can perhaps show this in more detail. So I think the bottom right photograph is probably the best to demonstrate this. So at the moment, along the boundary with the access to the car park is a fairly temporary looking, I think it's a combination of planters and fence, but it's not anchored into the ground. So the proposal, and I think it looks to be approximately a metre and a half in height. So the proposal would be to by condition to secure the implementation of a 2-metre high acoustic fence along there, which would give more protection against the transmission of noise and disturbance from this area to properties on boundary view. And having considered the further comments of the agent and discussed those with the Environmental Health Officer, it is still considered that would be necessary to limit noise transmission towards properties on boundary view. You'll also see on the top the top photograph towards the left, there's a marquee that's been erected, and that's a temporary measure pending the outcome of this application. And should members be minded to grant permission, there's a condition 4 on the recommendation which seeks that be removed within 1 month of the canopy being constructed to limit the amount of to ensure that activity in this outside area isn't increased by both the canopy and the marquee. So in terms of impact on the properties on boundary view in terms of loss of outlook, light, etc. Again, the bottom right photograph shows the distance between the canopy and the properties on boundary view. You'll recall it was a central pitched area with 2 monopitches either side. So the nearest part of the canopy would be approximately 3 metres in height, at a distance of approximately 18 metres from its westernmost side towards the nearest properties on boundary view. But at this height, really, it's not, and that distance, it's not considered that would adversely affect these properties in terms of loss of outlook or light. The proposal doesn't impact on the current parking arrangements, and the property has a substantial amount of in-curtilage parking, and the presence of the canopy wouldn't impact upon visibility, which I think reference was made to by people in leaving the either the properties on boundary view or the car park. It's set behind sight lines and wouldn't impact upon visibility. So by way of conclusion, whilst the needs, the requirements of the pub are noted and also balanced with the concerns of residents, in this instance, the canopy isn't considered to adversely impact upon visual or residential amenity in terms of loss of light, outlook or privacy. And as I've explained, the issues relating to noise, nuisance, disturbance are best covered by the premises licence and by statutory nuisance legislation, which would be dealt with by environmental health. And there's also the requirement to erect the acoustic fence along the western boundary to limit noise transmission towards the property's on boundary view. I've also explained there aren't any issues in terms of highway safety, so the recommendation is to grant as set out on page 51, and just drawing your attention to conditions 3, which is the installation of the acoustic fence, and also the removal of the temporary marquee within the grounds within 1 month of the erection of the canopy. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Lisa. Have members any further questions of Lisa, the Planning Officer? No. Councillor Hughes.
Thank you, Chair. Just quickly, in relation to condition 3, I'm just a little bit concerned about this, because we're saying that the fence needs to be installed prior to the use of the canopy being used, and they're using that area now, aren't they? So I'm just worried that, is there any other way you could say that? You know what I mean? In the sense that that area is being used, how will you know when the canopy is being used? If it's raining and they're all out there, or
right?
How can we show that?
Through you, Chair, perhaps if I can just answer that. Perhaps it's prior to the erection of the canopy. That perhaps would give more certainty that that you know the appropriate measures are in place before it's brought into use. So that might be a more appropriate form of words.
Sure. Happy with that, Councillor Tate. Councillor Tate.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I was delayed getting off mute there. My questions just surrounding point 3 as well, like Councillor Hughes. However, I'm probably a bit more lenient. Ultimately, at the moment, that area in front of the pub is being used as an outdoor area. Yeah, so the canopy is literally going to protect patrons from getting wet. And obviously, given the current situation with a lot of businesses, you know, I think it is going to be an additional cost to the owners of the pub. So I would prefer a condition that said we would like the acoustic barrier to be installed within 12 months of the canopy. I just think that would be fairer to the business owner. Does that make sense?
Put the Planning Officer on to make sense of it, Councillor Tate, for you. Lisa?
Thank you, Chair. It does. What I would say is that on the advice of the Environmental Health Officer, should noise complaints be received, they would be requesting that the applicant, the owner of the pub, takes appropriate steps to remedy those noise complaints, which may end up being an acoustic fence anyway. So I think it was felt that you know, the increased use of although it's an existing area and the canopy would just include would give weather protection, I guess, to people sitting outside, it would nevertheless extend the use of that area into a time and you know, times of the year as well where people wouldn't necessarily be sat out there. So it may give rise to increase noise in that area. So for that reason, that was why it was requested or suggested that it take place at the same time, concurrently with the provision of the canopy. But I do hear what you're saying, and that does make sense.
Thank you.
Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Chair. I've just been sitting there penciling in a little line to show where the 2 metre acoustic fence would go. Then I'm thinking, well, if I'm in that pub and there's an emergency, I can only rush off to the right because of effectively I've got a wall going from to the left. So one could argue that you know, there's plenty of space there, but you know, in emergency circumstances, there could be, heaven forbid, a time when people does rush out there and they need to get across out to Staindrop Road, and of course it will be blocked. So is it possible, I mean, a bit pedantic, I suppose, but is it possible to put some form of gate in there so they could actually get out in an emergency onto Staindrop Road?
If I could just mention, it would just be the fence would be along the western boundary, and I'm fairly sure, although I will check on the photographs, that there's a means of, there is a way of getting out of the grounds directly onto Staindrop Road. I'm just having a look through the photographs. So, Michael, if we can just go to photograph slide 23, please. The issue about having breaks in an acoustic fence is that obviously that then allows noise transmission and sort of reduces the effectiveness of that. Sorry, Michael, I think it's maybe the previous one, number 22.
At least I wasn't suggesting a break, but some form of opening recess so you can get out there in an emergency. I don't think it's beyond the wit of man to do that.
No,
I'm just thinking in an emergency, people will, I mean, I'm just looking at that middle door there now. If that part is blocked, the tendency will be to run to the right as we look at it, and you've got that 2-metre fence.
Right. No, the fence. Sorry, Councillor Lee, is just to go along the western boundary. So can you see the green sign in the corner of the photograph? And it would run along that boundary. This opening in the wall facing Staindrop Road would remain. So people could vacate the pub through the main doors and go straight out north onto Staindrop Road. That would still be retained.
That's assuming you've got access from the main door, or well.
Well, so I suppose you can see there the canopy is open, and obviously either side and through the central covered area. So people could leave the pub through the front doors and head north directly onto Staindrop Road.
Thank you, Lisa. Councillor Clark.
Yeah, I'd just like to really concur with Councillor Tate's thought process on this, but probably go a step further, to be honest with you, because, given local businesses are struggling at the moment, especially the hospitality area, the fact that we're proposing to, impose more costs on a business at this time just doesn't sit well with me. The fact that the outside area is being used anyway, and there's been no noise complaints whatsoever, having a canopy, it's in my mind, it's not going to change what people do at the moment. Yeah, you might get a few extra people sat out in the winter, but in all honesty, who wants to sit outside the pub in the winter? There's not many people that do that. So I would go probably one step further and take condition 3 out, to be honest with you, because it's quite clear that there's been no noise complaints whatsoever raised. So that's all I would say on the matter.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. Lisa?
Nothing further to add, thanks.
Were you moving something there, Councillor Tate and Councillor Clark? No?
I think I would like to move that, actually, that condition 3 is taken out of the proposal.
Thank you.
And I'd be happy to second that one.
All right. Councillor Heslop.
Yeah, I just want to ask, I appreciate what people say about businesses, but I also think in these times we've got to look at the neighbours and the impact on people's mental health that COVID's had as well. It's not a business side only. And I just want to ask for clarification. At the moment, as I understand it, that area is open. So the noise would probably be disseminated more. So I'm just wondering, how does a canopy affect the acoustics at distribution?
Lisa? I'm not sure whether I can answer that, Chair, but obviously, in commenting on the application, I couldn't say what the Environmental Health Officer looked at this and suggested the inclusion of the acoustic fence to limit the noise travelling westwards. I really couldn't comment as to how, a canopy would either contain noise and send it off in different directions, for want of a better phrase. That's not my area of expertise, I'm afraid. So I'm a bit stumped on that one, I'm afraid.
Okay, Councillor Keir.
My point was almost similar to Councillor Heslop's. I mean, in my experience with some type of noise attenuation for noise going up, etc. It tends to deaden noise rather than let it go out. You've got a fence there already, and I think there are hedges over the other side there. And is it 18 metres away? Did you say was the distance?
It is, yes.
So 18 metres. What's our normal sort of a guideline for noise in respect to just general noise, where we expect something without any noise attenuation? Is there a standard for that, or is there something for that? Because I would tend to follow Councillor Heslop's sort of a view that having something up there would prevent a lot of the noise escaping, and anything that does go would be at a low level, which would come across the fence anyway. So I'm just asking, I don't know, is 18 metres, is that a sort of is that an acceptable level of distance normally for something, particularly when we currently have an outdoor area where people can go and stand anyways?
Mm-hmm. Through you, Chair, if I could just answer that. I don't know whether what the distance requirements are, but having taken into account that distance, and as you can see from the bottom photograph, there's the canopy doesn't come to the end of the pub. It's sort of, I think the outer edge of it will be roughly centrally within the peak of the grey window at the side. There's then an entrance to the car park. There's the drives to the properties on boundary view. So the 18 metres is a reasonable distance, I think.
I'm just thinking, when you think the canopy itself, it drops to the central peak. It drops down to a height. Do you know what height that is? Because that fence is 1.5 metres, is it?
Roughly. So the nearest part of the canopy will be 3.1 metres in height. So the central point is 5.3 metres. You have the two monopitches, and the lowest part of the monopitch on the outside is 3
metres.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you've got 3.1 metres that's coming down, and then you've got a 1.5 metre fence. So you've got 1.5 metres of a gap. I mean, okay. I just wonder how that is. To Councillor Heslop's point, I just wonder how that affects acoustics and going across that. Personally, I would like something down on up above, because it stops all that noise permeating out from above. So I tend to have sympathy with what Councillor Heslop's saying in respect to that. I think the noise would be attenuated a bit more with the canopy than it would be being left open.
Councillor Wallace. Sorry, Councillor
Thank
Wallace.
Thank you. No, just briefly. Were the applicants aware of this condition, Lisa, and did they have any comment?
The letter that I read out or summarised, having been received subsequent to the papers being prepared, was their response to that. So they weren't aware of it prior to that, and they commented after the papers were prepared. So that's what I read out and summarised earlier.
Thank you.
Councillor Heslop. Your hand's up, Councillor Heslop. Did you want to come back?
Sorry, I didn't take it down.
That's quite all right. Councillor Lee.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm just looking for, I'm just looking for the comment by the applicant. I mean, sitting in the past problems with premises like this, it is concerning from time to time, and I do feel there should be some kind of sound barrier up there. It'll be more comforting for the people next door, particularly in the summer months when children start running around. It's not a reflection on the pub by any means. The pub is there to bring happiness and joy to people who go there. But we do know noise travels. We do know noise travels, particularly on a clear summer's evening. And as I say, in the past, when we've had similar complaints, from similar applications, you do feel sorry for the people who have to live next door. So for my sake, from my point of view, I think we should go ahead with the barrier. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Toscoven. Councillor Toscoven.
Can you hear me now, Chair?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, thank you. I'm in agreement that the canopy will provide some form of attenuation, But I think Lisa mentioned another application that was actually granted in Middleton One Row at the Davenport, and we granted that without a barrier, without a canopy. The properties were closer to the pub than they are in the Mowden area. So whilst each application is a separate application, I think we do have to perhaps look at what we've done in the past and what we should be doing in the future. That's all. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. No further questions. Do you want to sum up, Lisa, please,
I think there's some
before
more
we...
hands. I think there's more hands.
Oh, there's more hands popped up. Right, Councillor Hughes.
Thank you very much, Chair. In relation to paragraph 16, it's really clear that the Environmental Health Officer, having looked at the situation, is recommending the fence. And also, by agreeing this, it's no reflection on the current owners, because the canopy is going to be a permanent feature of the pub. And that means that the next people that come after them will have a fence that can protect residents. So I think that's really important, and I'll just leave it at that, Chair. Thank you.
Councillor McCall, you had your hand up. Have you taken it down? Have you changed your mind?
Sorry, Chair. I was going to move an amendment to the substantive on the table, but I'll wait until Lisa's summed up.
Right, that's fine. Thank you very much. Lisa, Councillor Allen, you've got your hand up. Councillor Allen?
Yes, thank you, Chair. It was just in relation to something that Councillor Tostevin said. Whilst I appreciate we do make decisions in various places, I do think it's important to realise that we are supposed to only make decisions on what is before us at that given moment, not on what we've done in the past and not what we might do in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Allen. Councillor Tostevin, your hand is still up. Have you just forgot to take it down?
I haven't. I've taken it down now. Thank you, Chair.
All right. Thank you very much. Right, Lisa, do you want to summarise all this?
Yes, just briefly, Chair. Okay, then. So obviously an existing external seating area, and the proposal is to erect a canopy over part of that. No impact or no significant concerns with regard to visual impact. We've discussed obviously at some length about the impact on residential amenity in terms of noise, nuisance and disturbance. The property is covered by a premises licence, and statutory nuisance legislation also exists to control activities outside of the pub in that outside area, which are best placed to deal with those areas rather than specific planning conditions. No particular issues in terms of highway safety either. So obviously results in our recommendation to grant permission. And that's it. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. So we've got an amendment on the table moved by Councillor Tate and seconded by Councillor Clark, and that's to take out condition 3. Does that still be on the table?
It does, but it was the other way around.
Moved by Councillor Clark and seconded by Councillor Tate. Is that what you mean?
That's correct.
Right. Fine. Okay. Paul, can we bring you in to do the roll call? But I think Councillor McCall wants to move something else.
I was just about to say, Councillor Jones, yes, we've got a substantive motion which has been moved by Councillor Clark, seconded by Councillor Tate, that the officer recommendation is approved, but with the removal of condition number 3. But as you say, I think Councillor McCollum is wanting to come back in.
Cheers. Councillor McCollum.
Thank you. That's good memory there. I would disagree respectfully with colleagues. I think that the acoustic barrier is warranted. Currently, the outside provision is helped by a temporary marquee, which will obviously decrease the amount of noise that is permeating through to neighbours. And following on from the point made by my colleague Cindy Hughes, I would beg to move the officer's recommendation, but amend condition 3 to replace prior to the use of the canopy to the erection of the fence with the prior to the use of the canopy with erection of the canopy, if that is all right. Thank you, Chair.
Do we have a seconder for that?
I'll second that.
Councillor Hughes.
Could you just explain that again, please?
Sorry, through you, Chair, for Councillor Marshall's benefit.
Yes.
I believe that the the recommendation by the Environmental Health Officer was quite clear in that acoustic barriers should be included and should be increased in height. So a fence of 2 meters should be installed. But as my colleague, Councillor Hughes, suggested, it might be better to enforce that with the erection of the canopy rather than prior to the use of it, just for a bit more clarity in when that clause kicks in. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
We've a substantive motion and we've got an amendment. Paul, do you want to do the roll calls of them, please?
Yeah, no problem at all. If I can just clarify, Councillor McCollum, with yourself. So you would be seeking to amend condition number 3, and I think it's 1, 2, 3, 4 lines down. You're taking out prior to the use of. I'll go through the roll call. If you can indicate whether you're for or against when I call your name. Councillor Allen.
For.
Councillor Clark.
Against.
Councillor Cousins.
For.
Councillor Heslop.
For.
Councillor Cindy Hughes.
For.
Councillor Johnson.
For.
Councillor Mrs Doris Jones.
Against.
Councillor Keir.
Against.
Councillor Lee.
For.
Councillor Marshall.
For.
Councillor McCollum.
For.
Councillor Tate.
Against.
Councillor Tostervan.
Abstain.
Abstain. Councillor Wallace.
For.
Thank you. If you bear with me a moment, please. Okay, Chair, the vote on the amendment was 9 for, 4 against and 1 abstention. That means that the amendment has been carried and now becomes the substantive motion. If there's nothing else that members wish to move, I can move to a vote on the substantive motion. I'll leave it to you, Chair.
Well, nobody's showing a hand, Paul, so we can go to with the move. Move on the substantive motion. Oh, hang on, Councillor Keir's popped his hand up at the last minute. Councillor Keir. Councillor Keir, you're on mute. Oh,
I think he's put his hand down.
I'll take my hand down, Councillor.
Okay, Councillor Tate, your hand's up as well.
Hello, I don't mean to drag this one out, Chair. Just in regards to condition number 3, then, I'd like to amend it that they do have the acoustic sound barrier, but in erection within 12 months of the canopy.
Okay. Have you got that, Paul?
So, acoustic barrier. So, presumably, well, we've now got the local planning authority erection of the canopy. You want to insert within 12 months?
Yeah, and an acoustic barrier to be built within 12 months of the canopy.
Can you do that?
And the reason for that is because I think it gives the business who've already replied to the recommendation and said that it would have an impact on finance. I think it was, Lisa, was that correct in the reply?
That was part of it, yes.
It was, yes. So we have a business which has said to us that it might have an implication. They're all going to pay for the canopy. Now they want an additional fence. I just think it gives them a little bit more flexibility if they've got a bit more time to be able to do that.
If I can just seek some appropriate wording from the planning officer.
Yes,
no
Lisa.
problem. Thank you.
Well, I'll second that.
Right, I think Dave maybe wanted to step in.
Yeah, if I may, Chair, just very briefly,
yeah.
I think I fully understand Councillor Tate's position, and he's trying to give the business as much leeway as possible in these difficult circumstances. I fully understand that, but from a planning perspective, if environmental health feel it's necessary, and I suppose Councillor Tate is accepting that by putting this condition forward. I do feel it's, in terms of balance, it's important that if it is deemed to be necessary, it's put in place now, rather than at some future date down the road, because what that effectively does is tilts that balance somewhat in favour of the business, and anybody who's living nearby who would benefit from the attenuation from the acoustic screen would have to wait for 12 months of potential problems. And if there was a noise nuisance and disturbance complaint as a result of this, I think it would fetter our environmental health team's ability to deal with that effectively, because if I was the landlord of the pub, my first point of defence saying, well, I've actually done nothing wrong because the planning department or planning committee have considered this and I don't have to do this for 12 months. And I think it just would fetter our ability to take effective action quickly. And my view would be to, if it is deemed to be necessary by members, it should be done at the same time as the canopy. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Allen, you put your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Whilst I have every consideration for Councillor Tate's response to this, might a solution be, I don't know, do we have any forms of financial pot like the government originally did concerning businesses and helping businesses tide over, that possibly the applicants could call upon, that meant A, the fence could be built straight away, and B, the applicants would not be suffering financially straight away?
Councillor Allen, I think that may well be out of the Planning Committee's remit, but I will ask the officers to respond to that.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Yes, I would agree that, you know, it really is beyond our remit, and I think any sort of pursuance of any grant assistance would have to be done separately to the planning application. So, yeah, thanks, Chair.
Nice thought, Councillor Allen. I know where you're coming from, but we can't just do that. Councillor Hughes.
Yep, just very simply, I also have respect for Councillor Tate's concern in the current crisis, but I think that our duty is to protect residential amenity. So I would be supporting the substantive motion. Thank you.
Thank you. I think, Paul, we're ready to take a vote now. Thank you. Can you do the roll call, please?
In fact, sorry, I hate to labour the point, but if I just clarify the wording around condition 3 that Councillor Tate is proposing, is it just to insert within a period of 12 months hereby approved? Would that be where that would fit in, Lisa?
That would be my choice, yes.
Yeah.
Okay, that's fine. That's okay then. Okay then, so the amendment on the table moved by Councillor Tate and seconded by Councillor Clark. And if I go through once again, Councillor Allen.
Against.
Councillor Clark.
For.
Councillor Cousins.
Prior to the canopy hereby approved.
Sorry, Lisa, you.
Can we start again? Sorry.
Councillor Cousins.
Against.
Councillor Heslop.
Against.
Councillor Cindy Hughes.
Against.
Councillor Johnson. Sorry, Councillor Johnson, I can't hear you.
My button doesn't seem to work well. Against.
Oh
Again,
dear.
a bit sticky today. Councillor Mrs Jones.
Against.
Councillor Keir.
Another one with a sticky button.
Councillor Lee.
Against.
Councillor Marshall.
Against.
Councillor McCollum.
Against.
Councillor Tate.
For.
Councillor Tostervan.
Against.
Councillor Wallace.
Against.
Okay, Chair, that's 2 votes for the amendment, 12 votes against. The amendment's fallen. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you all very much. That's the decision on that.
We need to revert back to the substantive motion, Chair.
Oh,
If there's
beg your
nothing
pardon.
further.
Yes, yes. Can we revert back to the substantive motion?
If there's nothing further to be moved, then the substantive motion was originally moved by Councillor McCollum, seconded by Councillor Hughes.
Yes.
And so we're back to the the previous wording. So if I can go for Councillor Allen.
For.
Councillor Clark.
Abstain.
Councillor Cousins.
For.
Councillor Heslop.
For.
Councillor Cindy Hughes.
For.
Councillor Charles Johnson.
For.
Councillor Mrs Doris Jones.
For.
Councillor Keir.
For.
Councillor Lee.
For.
Councillor Marshall.
For.
Councillor McCollum.
For.
Councillor Tate.
Abstain.
Councillor Tostovan.
For.
And Councillor Wallace.
For.
Thank you. If you bear with me a moment. Okay, Chair, so that's 12 for the substantive motion, 2 abstentions. The motion is carried. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Paul. Thank you, members. Can I ask, there are no supplementary items in part 1, but can I ask, are there any questions? Any part 1 questions? No. Thank you very much. There are no part 2 either. So we go straight to part 3, and that's pursuant to section 100B5 of the Local Government Act 1970.